Hey everybody, welcome back. Good afternoon. Good to see you guys and girls showing up for Orange Coast College. This is our Tuesday, Thursday critical thinking class, the 1245 to 210 crew. Welcome one and all. I know it's not yet class time, but soon we'll all be arriving as it gets closer to 1245, and we have another important lecture today, another lesson on the topic of fallacies. We got to get through the fallacies of relevance. So that's the mission today, to go over the definition of 8 additional fallacies that fall under a second category, the category fallacy of relevance. So I'll be right with you guys getting that started at 1245. If you're already here, welcome. Good to see everybody. Hope you're all really healthy and safe right now as we deal with this little disruption to our everyday lives in society, but you know, we're all in it together, and we're going to be fine in the end, I know. Hi, Nicholas. How are you? Good to see you guys. Cool. I'll be right back. 1 second. I'm just, I'm going to bring over some food that I had. Doing these live streams all morning, I don't even have time to sit back and put some food in me, but it's all right. See, it's a hash brown. Should have been for breakfast. Now it's for lunch. Oh well. Welcome back. Still got 3 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. If you guys never tried this place, I highly recommend it. Plant Power. It's over in Long Beach. They got some in San Diego too. I live right next door to it, so I'm going there all the time. Back. Hey there, good to see you, Dana. Oh, yeah. No coffee. Get things moving. Hello, hey Andy, how are you? Good to see you guys. Anybody that's here in attendance, feel free to chime in, comment at any point, obviously. I'm here to help, and I'm here to answer questions. Hey, Andrew, I'm missing all you guys. Hopefully you guys are doing really good, sitting back and staying healthy, enjoying some time off if you can. Okay. Hey there, hey. Hello, Alondra, Amber, everybody there. Good to see everybody. Cool. Nice to see the usernames in the live stream. Gives me a sense of people showing up, and it usually takes a couple minutes in the class time before we get closer to our full attendance, but it's already good to go. We got about 10 so far. Let me bring my wristwatch really fast. All right. Okay, everybody, well, welcome back. It's Tuesday, April the 7th. Good to see everyone here, and today we have another important meeting because today's meeting is needed. Hey there, Kyle, Phi, and everybody. Today's lecture is needed for you to do well on the homework that's due this Thursday. Hey, Wesley. So don't forget, right, you have a homework assignment that's due on Thursday this week, and it's just based on the fallacies of relevance that we've all started today to study. So last Thursday, we started talking about fallacies in general. We went over what are called fallacies of ambiguity, and we learned 5 of them. There were fallacy of equivocation, amphibole, accent, and then division and composition. So today we have a new category of fallacies, a new group, and this is the group that's called fallacies of relevance. So last Thursday, fallacies of ambiguity, and today, Tuesday the 7th, it's fallacies of relevance. The homework assignment Okay, exercise 5-3, that's on page 151 and 2. That is just based on these fallacies of relevance that we're going to go over today. So you have to really be in tune with today's meeting and the topics discussed to have your best chance to have a good homework submission on Thursday. Now, for the midterm that you guys did last week, I'm getting close to finishing those. I'm going to have them done tonight. And what I was going to say is tomorrow morning, I'm going to send around a Canvas announcement to the class, just telling you that you can then inquire for your grade. And just, any grade check or check on your scores, you can confer with me by email starting tomorrow. I like to do it individually, so I'm not going to just post a mass mailing of grades to everybody. I like to show people the individual comments in scanned images of the pages that they wrote or typed. So I would like to do it that way. Anyway, I'm done grading the midterms tonight is what I'm saying, in other words. And I'll announce by Canvas tomorrow that you can email for an inquiry with your grade and written comments. So that's all good. That's going to be behind us, and then you have to focus on turning in your homework as an email attachment no later than the class period on Thursday, so before 12:45 p.m. on Thursday. Okay, and then beyond that, we will have a quiz on fallacies that's closely following the quiz you're going to turn in, sorry, the homework that you're going to turn in this Thursday. So the next quiz is next Tuesday, a week from today. And it's very easy for me to give you guys the answer key for the homework that you guys are doing. So I'm going to provide the answer key right after everyone turns it in. And so you will know your score on the midterm and this homework assignment going into the quiz of next Tuesday. All right, so that's the little action-packed week we have here. Turning in homework this week, getting your grade back from last week's midterm, and then looking ahead to a quiz. The quiz is going to be on all the fallacies that we're going to learn. So we learned 5 fallacies of ambiguity. We're going to learn 8 fallacies of relevance today. So 8 plus 5, that's 13. And then there are 7 fallacies of unwarranted assumption. And that's the discussion topic for this next class Thursday. So that adds to 20 in total. So there's 20 total fallacies that everyone wants to be familiar with, to know their definitions, and to be able to identify examples of them. Okay? So if that is all clear to you guys, then I'm going to go on and start talking about our material right now. So we're looking at chapter 5 for the moment, and that's all about fallacies. So fallacies in general are when there are logical errors or flaws in an argument, and because of those errors and flaws, it makes it so that it's a bad argument. It makes it so that the premises don't give the right support to the conclusion. And over the centuries, over the millennia, really, different fallacies have been identified and labeled by names. So by knowing what these fallacies are, we will be less susceptible to being manipulated or deceived by fallacious arguments. And we will also be able to avoid committing the fallacies when we discuss topics and when we make arguments and exchange information with other people. So it's a key skill. This is something that's very fundamental to the whole topic of critical thinking. If you study this type of class, Intro to Critical Thinking, here, there, or anywhere, you're always going to be learning one unit on informal fallacies of reason. So this is a very universal element of any class in Introduction to Critical Thinking. That's why it's important for us to be clear about it. So anyway, fallacies. The first category of them were the fallacies of ambiguity that we went over last Thursday. I'm going to quickly just brush over that again and review it so that it's staying in your mind, but then we will go on and talk about today's batch, which are those fallacies of relevance. Okay, so going back to last Thursday for a minute, fallacies of ambiguity. The first one is the fallacy of equivocation. Okay, so remember that equivocation is the fallacy which involves using a word more than once in an argument, but it has different meanings at the different places where it occurs. And hey, Hilario. And that causes the conclusion to not follow from the premises. So when a single word is used more than once, but with different meanings, that's when we equivocate on the meaning of the word, and that's a fallacy. Let me give you a quick example just off the top of my head. So imagine this argument. I like boxing, and when holiday season comes around, we have to, let me put it this way. I like to box. When holiday season comes around, we all have to box the gifts. So therefore, I love holiday season. Could this be an equivocation fallacy? Maybe. If we're using which word perhaps in different ways. Let's see your suggestion here, or your conclusion. What do you think I'm getting at? I like to box. In the holiday season, we get to box presents. So I like the holidays. Good. Okay, box, right? In the first premise, maybe what I'm saying is I like to box like I like to spar and go to the boxing gym, like the sport of boxing. In the second premise, where it says during the holidays we box gifts, I should say order of letters. It's the same word, box. But to box in the athletic sense is not to box in the retail sense or in the gift-giving sense. And so in that example, we've equivocated, and the conclusion does not follow that I like the holiday season if what I like is boxing in the sporting sense. And in the second premise, it's mentioned that a person does box things during the holidays. So if I like boxing and the holidays involve boxing of gifts, we're not talking about boxing in the same sense throughout. Okay, so any example like that where a key term switches up the meaning halfway through an argument, that means equivocation has been committed, and that's a fallacy. Sometimes, it's actually quite important for you not to be misled by the way that people equivocate on terms. For example, in law, you oftentimes undertake contracts. You voluntarily enter into user agreements, you click I accept, or you read a little contract statement and then you sign on a line. Sometimes when you agree to these things, you're understanding the words enclosed in the document in a way that's different from their legal meaning or the way that the creator of the document or contract intended it. So, you may sign on a line and it says, I agree to not fill in the blank. I agree to not possess materials from another competing company as long as I work here. But what's the definition of the term possess? Maybe you thought it meant that you had to own them, but maybe they just meant that that means you can't even have them in your in your living space or in your car or something. So anyways, always be clear about the unambiguous interpretation of words that are involved in agreements, arguments, contracts, and other things. That's some of the larger social importance of not committing or being misled by equivocation. Okay, so after that, there's amphibole, okay? Amphibole was the second fallacy of ambiguity, and that's the one that involves grammatical ambiguity. It's when there's some grammatical ambiguity in the argument or claim, and it means that we're not sure what conclusion to draw. Let me give you an example just off the top of my head, using the plural pronoun they, okay? So say I tell you this, the dogs were chasing the cats and they were brown. Okay, can you tell me what's ambiguous there? Like we're not sure what word, what thing is being referred to by what word in that example. The dogs were chasing the cats and they were brown. What is ambiguous there? What's the grammatical ambiguity? I think you can spot it if you hear the example. Which they? Correct. Okay, so they is a plural pronoun, but there's two groups of plural subjects in this example. There's the dogs that are chasing the cats. They're the cats that are being chased by the dogs. These are two separate categories of plural subjects, and there's just one use of the word they. So when it says dogs are chasing the cats and they're brown, who knows? Is it the dogs that are brown dogs chasing the cats? Or is it brown cats being chased by the dogs? You'd have to inquire to disambiguate in order for you to know how to interpret that statement. So that would be a grammatically ambiguous statement, and that's an amphibole example for one example. Okay, good. Good help from you guys, Andrew and Andy and others. Next up, the accent fallacy. Okay, so accent fallacy is when an emphasis or stress is placed on certain words or phrases in an argument or statement, and it has the effect of changing the meaning of the originally intended statement. So in the book, they gave the example of like the parent comes home, sees that the daughter has set the house on fire and is upset and says, "What is this? I told you don't ever play with matches. Why did you do that?" Child says, "I know, but technically I didn't play with matches. I'm in here, you could call this science or research. I want to see how flames and combustion works. I'm setting things on fire with a stone cold, serious demeanor. So where's the play? I mean, you said don't play with matches, and I didn't. But look, by accenting, emphasizing whatever the word play, it's changing the meaning from what the parent clearly intended, which is just don't do anything involving matches, to something more narrow, like you can use the matches as long as what you do with them does not amount to some type of fun playtime activity. Okay, so that would be, accent fallacy. And then there was division and composition. So briefly, division is the fallacy where you illegitimately assume that since a whole group or category has a feature, that each individual member of that same category must have the same feature. And that's just usually, or at least not always, true. Say there's a big hotel and room 101 is one of the rooms. It does not follow the conclusion that the room is big. You can have a big hotel built of small rooms. So sometimes a whole has qualities that are not seen in every part. The United States is the most powerful country. I'm one citizen of the United States. I'm a part of it. Does that mean that I'm one of the most powerful people? No, not necessarily. So, that's a case where the sum is greater than the parts, like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, as it were. I am talking to you. The cells in my body are the parts that make me up. Can the individual cells sitting in a petri dish talk to you? No. So again, there's a situation where the whole has a feature that the part does not have. So division is when you assume that because the group has a feature, that each part of it does too, and that's not always true. Composition then is just in the opposite direction, where you start off with the individual member of a category. You present the information that that member has a feature or attribute, and then erroneously infer that the whole group has the same. So say that, I don't know, imagine a person's living in poverty and they're a citizen of the United States. Of course, that doesn't follow that the United States is an impoverished nation, right? The cells in my body cannot be seen without a microscope. Therefore, I can't be seen without a microscope? No. The whole system formed by each part is something that is easily visible. For example, you're looking at me, but the parts are not. So sometimes the whole has features that parts don't have of the whole, and sometimes the parts have features that the whole group or collective or category doesn't have. So that's just review for everybody from last week. Wanted to make sure that that stays in your mind. But now we're going to go on. And so we're still with fallacies. We're still on chapter 5, but now we're going to move into a second category of them. And that is not fallacies of ambiguity, but rather they're called fallacies of relevance. Okay, so let me go into this. Fallacies of relevance. Okay, so this is the category of fallacies that we're studying and learning about today. And I just want to first begin by talking to you about what the overall topic of fallacies of relevance is. So these fallacies are grouped together. Pen cap, gotta grab that. Okay, yeah, so these fallacies are grouped under this category because they have premises in which those premises are not related or irrelevant to the conclusion of the argument. So when one or more of the premises of the argument is irrelevant or unrelated to the conclusion. Use the singular, sorry for that. When one or more of the premises of the argument is irrelevant or unrelated to the conclusion. So that's the critical error and flaw or defect with this type of fallacious argument. When the premises, one or more of them, don't have the correct type of logical relationship or relevance to the conclusion of the argument. So if the premises don't give the right type of relevant support to the conclusion, then they're not establishing that conclusion with any logical force. In a good argument, right, the premises are the reasons that stand behind the conclusion. They are supposed to be the reasons that give you a sense that the conclusion is true. The premises, if it's a good argument, establish either that the conclusion has to be true or that it probably would be true. But if you have a fallacy of relevance, then the problem there is that the premises, whatever they are saying, they don't actually have a relevant logical connection to the conclusion that they're attempting to support. So that's a bad, invalid argument when the premises are not related to, are not relevant to the claim of the argument, the conclusion of the argument. So there are many different ways that arguments can commit fallacies of relevance. In fact, there are 8 individual members of this category that we're going to learn today. So the group we're studying is this group. This is the group name. And now we're going to learn what the individual members of the group are. Just like in our class, right? Our class is called Philosophy A150. But to talk about the members of the class, you have to name them off, like you guys each have names, right? So this is the group name of fallacies of relevance, but we need to know the individual items that fall within its scope. So there are 8 of them. The next thing I'm going to do to get our conversation going to the next stage is I'm just going to list the 8 individual items that fall into this definition, the 8 fallacies of relevance, in other words. I'm first going to just write them on this whiteboard so that we can all see them and put them in our notes. But then I'm going to go over each one by one, stating the definition, giving you guys the examples of it, and we will talk about it as we go. Okay, so as usual, I'm going to have to erase as we go to create a little additional room. So I'm taking this down for now. Fallacies of relevance, everyone saw the definition. When one or more of the premises of the argument is irrelevant or unrelated to the conclusion. And I think some students have asked me this, and I've said a few times, but I'll remind you that anything we're talking about, any of these live streams, can be viewed later at your leisure if you want to review them, or if you happen to miss a lecture and you'd like to catch up. These remain on this YouTube channel, and they're all permanently archived. So feel free to watch them anytime. If a definition went by quickly or something, you have a playback that you can look at, okay? So next up. Also, right, if anybody ever did want to have the equivalent of like a face-to-face office hour type of interaction with me, that's fine too. I'm just doing those by Skype and based on individual requests. I know that not everybody has a need for that, but if there's ever anybody that has some desire to have a more personal chat about the class or your work or anything else, the equivalent of like a face-to-face office hour, then definitely let me know any time and we can set up an appointment to do a Skype video chat or something like that. I've done that with some other students. It seems to be working well. I offer it to you as an option if you ever have that need, but you may not. It's just something that I'm putting out there. Okay, but back to our list. So 8 fallacies of relevance. If you guys are all with me, I'm going to list them out. So the first one is called personal attack. Okay, now the personal attack fallacy also has kind of like an alternative name that is sometimes is called by. Like how earlier in the semester when I talked to you about modus ponens, I said it's also sometimes known as affirming the antecedent, or that modus tollens is sometimes labeled denying the consequent. Okay, well, in a similar way, personal attack is one standard name for this fallacy, but if you ever look at it in other places and you read about it, you'll know that it's also called sometimes ad hominem, which is its older kind of classical Latin name. So I'm putting that here in parentheses below so that you know that that's the second label. And it's written in our book, so just understand that those are the same synonyms, personal attack, or you could call it ad hominem. In Latin, ad hominem means to the man. Hominem, man, ad, to the. So we'll talk about this fallacy in detail in just a moment, but it's basically a fallacy where you attack a person instead of their argument. So that's one fallacy we're going to cover. After that, there's also what is called appeal to force. And the textbook does mention that appeal to force has an alternative name as well. So sometimes you'll see it referred to as scare tactics. So I'm putting that here underneath so you can see both names. So appeal to force, aka otherwise known as scare tactics. So those are two so far. Okay, third one, appeal to pity. All right. Then popular appeal. Okay. Appeal to ignorance. All right. I'm going to move over into this column, I guess, to create a little extra room. Or maybe I can sneak one more here at the bottom if you don't mind. So hasty generalization. Hasty generalization. Generalization. Hasty generalization. Okay, two more, which I'll put up over here. Strawman. And then last, red herring. All right, so here you see 8 itemized members of the fallacy of relevance group, okay? Now, these 8 terms are the optional answers for the homework assignment that you guys have to turn in this Thursday. The homework assignment is exercise 5.3 on page 151 and 2, part 1, letter A through Z. In each of those lettered examples, there's a little passage which contains one of the 8 fallacies written here. So your answers for each question, it's going to be one of these 8 words, or a couple of them don't contain a fallacy. So basically you have 9 possibilities for your answers with A through Z on the homework. Either it's one of these 8 things, or it's the words no fallacy. I'm telling you there's not too many that don't have a fallacy, just a couple. So most all of them are associated with one of these terms here. Okay, so just being very clear, the homework that's due this Thursday does not involve the fallacies of ambiguity, does not involve the next category that we'll learn this Thursday, the fallacies of unwarranted assumption. It only has to do with the fallacies of relevance. So you definitely do want to be clear that this lesson today, April 7th, Tuesday, is just this material that is being questioned of you on the homework for Thursday, next class, okay? So we see them all here. You see the 8. Now I'm going to clear the board a bit, and we'll start off with the first one and give you definitions and examples. All right, so let's begin with that. I'm going to then start up at the top with personal attack. Okay. So personal attack fallacy. This is actually one of the most widely committed fallacies by people all around. And what it is suppose someone makes an argument and you or whoever does not agree with the conclusion. So someone makes a claim that you don't like or you don't agree with it. But the problem would be if instead of giving a logical counter-argument to their claim, if you just made a personal attack against them, not attacking their argument or showing why it's false, but instead just directly making a personal attack against the character or circumstances of the person who presented the argument. So instead of presenting a logical counter-argument, one attacks the person who made the argument. Instead of giving a logical counter-argument, one attacks the person who presented the argument. All right, so it's the type of fallacy of argument that's committed when you start insulting or attacking a person on a personal level instead of going against the argument that they've made. So imagine like a situation like this. Somebody says, you know, global warming, I think it's real. I've seen a lot of climate data compiled by scientists, climate scientists and meteorologists. If you take a look at these graphs, you'll see the temperatures increasing as we get closer to the current day. Don't you think we should do something about that? Global warming's a problem. What do you say? Now, it would be a personal attack if their correspondent said this. No, what you said is completely false because your breath is horrible. It smells like garbage, so you don't know what you're talking about. Now, what's problematic with that reply? It doesn't have anything to do with their argument. Has this really successfully achieved a rebuttal of their argumentative position? No. Maybe their breath does stink, but does that have anything to do with, is that relevant to disputing their conclusion? No. Instead of telling them why they've made a false claim, if you don't agree with them, you should be able to provide a logical reason why it's false. You should be able to say, okay, well, here's why I dispute your premises, or here's where I think your conclusion is based on faulty inference. But you cannot just say, your argument is invalid because your breath smells, or because you're ugly, or because look at how you're dressed. Anybody wearing that outfit doesn't know anything. These are not related to the substance of the argument. So when people make cases, claims, arguments to you, you're supposed to respond to the information in the argument. If you don't agree with the conclusion, then you have to say what's wrong with those reasons and give different reasons for the contrary. But you can't just assume that it's a fair way to respond by attacking the person in personal terms. In fact, that undermines the effectiveness of your own argumentative position, because any rational person who sees you committing ad hominem personal attacks is not going to say, wow, that's the better argument. That person really knows their stuff because look how they're insulting everyone. No, if anything, it just makes it seem that the person who has to resort to the personal attack doesn't have more sound logical evidence to respond to this argument with. So by the time it gets down into name calling, insults, and personal accusations of those kinds, that means that we've gone off the rails and we're no longer having a logical discussion of ideas based on evidence. It doesn't matter who presents an argument to you. You're supposed to reply to the argument as though it came from an anonymous source. It doesn't matter how the person dresses, looks, what their racial heritage is, or anything else. If you say to a person, I don't know, you can't have that opinion because, you know, you're a man, or you're a woman, or you're white, or black, brown, whatever, you're attacking the person's circumstances instead of their argument. So I give you some more examples from the book here. So person says, so you guys maybe remember, I don't know, in 2015, right after the Supreme Court issued the same-sex marriage ruling that federally legalized that in all 50 states, there was this marriage clerk, Kim Davis in Kentucky, and she did not want to issue those licenses, even though, according to the Supreme Court ruling, she was violating the law because they had equal protection under the law to get those licenses issued. So she was being resistant to the judicial ruling. And people who criticized her, some of them anyway, said this: how can you not issue these marriage licenses? You've had 3 divorces. Okay, look, it's true that Kim Davis had those divorces, but by saying this, it's like saying your argument is invalid because your personal record or your marital record shows that you needed to apply for different marriage licenses. Could she be called a hypocrite? Fair enough. But whether a person is a hypocrite or not has nothing to do with the substance of their argument. If she's making a credible argument that, you know, religious principles or something are supposed to take precedence over these judicial rulings, then that's the argument that you're supposed to consider, not taking in view the idiosyncrasies of the person's past. A person making a hypocritical argument is still making an argument, and it's the argument you have to reply to, not the person's own inconsistency between their statements and behavior, okay? Another example, Someone says, I think there's got to be extraterrestrial life out there because we exist and it's a big universe, and the odds are that that's something that wouldn't only happen once. What do you think? And here's the response from the person who commits ad hominem. No way, man. The thing about you is you're an insane person. I mean, you're completely bonkers and crazy. So whatever you're telling me, it's definitely not true. Look, I mean, you're attacking, in that case, the person's mental stability, accusing them of being insane or having a mental illness. But do you give any reason why their argument is based on false evidence or why the conclusion is not rational? No. So when you want to actually respond critically to a person's argument or position, then you have to, give an argument as to why their view is false. But once you start attacking them on a personal level, you've gotten away from the argument itself, and now you're just attacking the man or woman who makes the case. That's like attacking the messenger. They're just providing an argument to you. It doesn't really matter what they've done in their own life. It's the argument that has to be attended to in a logical discussion of ideas. Imagine this exchange between two people, Pat and Chris. So Pat and Chris don't agree on the policy of legal access to abortion. So Pat says, I think abortion is wrong because it intentionally ends the life of a living human being, okay? Chris comes back and says, come on, you pro-life people are just a bunch of narrow-minded religious fanatics. So he's just attacking him because he has a certain religious affiliation, but he's not saying why his argument is wrong. But here's the problem. Pat takes the bait and starts replying with his own ad hominem, and he says back, oh yeah? Well, you're just an anti-life, baby-killing Nazi. Now that's really gotten off the rails, hasn't it? It's descended and devolved into insults and personal attacks, and now we're no longer having any discussion about the wisdom or rationality of the policy that permits legal access to abortion. So sometimes it's very difficult to maintain your rational even-handedness when people are leveling personal attacks at you. So the temptation that most have is that when you give an argument and another person commits an ad hominem against you, you feel offended and you want to do the same back to them. If I give you a rational argument that some social policy is a bad idea, and then you say, well, you're just dumb, I would definitely have a temptation to be like, oh, you're calling me dumb? Well, let's look at you and let's talk about your personality and your character and circumstances. But you should not take the bait. Because if the person pulls you down into the gutter where it just becomes back and forth ad hominems, then we're not getting any closer to having a rational conclusion based on evidence and sound reasons. So although I know there's a temptation any human would feel to defend themselves in kind when they're attacked on a personal level, it doesn't really help you or the other person or anybody else to do that. If anything, it just intensifies these disagreements and takes us further from a rational meeting of the minds. And just a couple more cases. Here's an example. So suppose Raul is a person who has argued in favor of affirmative action. They say, we need some type of policy that corrects for the influence of bias in admissions and hiring. And therefore, some type of system, call it a quota-based system or whatever, is necessary to achieve diversity, which is a value. Now, suppose that the critic of Raul says, okay, that's not true. The only reason you're saying that, Raul, is because you're Hispanic, and therefore you're going to benefit from affirmative action, right? Well, look, this is, again, a personal attack. It's pointing to the circumstances of Raul's racial heritage as the reason his argument is invalid. But if there's a problem with affirmative action, it's not a problem with Raul. It's a problem with the design of the policy and the way it's executed in a society. So the critic of affirmative action should not be attacking Raul, who's just putting the argument on the table. They should be attacking the policy on independent and neutral grounds. So try and keep that in mind, right? There's definitely problems because a lot of people do commit this fallacy. We see it happening, in the media, in politics, in everyday speech and thought. And it's better to try and hold ourselves to a higher standard, to discuss ideas, but not to attack people who provide those ideas, okay? All right, so sometimes people distinguish between the two kinds of ad hominem: abusive, where you just straight up attack the character of the person, versus circumstantial ad hominem, where you attack their circumstances. That's not a distinction I want to make a big deal about, but you could argue that if I point out, well, you're white, so what do you know about, racism? Or, you're Hispanic, so of course you're going to support affirmative action. That would be the circumstantial kind. And the abusive kind would just be, I'm going to insult you in a way that doesn't refer to your circumstances, like the way you dress, the way you look, the way your breath smells, or whatever. Okay, good. So hopefully that is coming clear to you guys. We've talked about the ad hominem fallacy, the personal attack fallacy, and I'm going to go on and get into the next the next example, which is the scare tactic, appeal to force fallacy. All right. Okay, so what is the appeal to force fallacy? This is actually, I think, pretty easy to understand. This is the fallacy that happens when you use or threaten to use force to get another person to back down or to accept your position. When you use or threaten to use force to get someone to back down or accept your position, your view. Okay, so that is the appeal to force, aka scare tactic fallacy definition. So now, when we're saying force, it could cover a number of possibilities. It could be like actual literal physical force. That would be like the most extreme example. Suppose somebody says to you, climate change is real, you know, there's a lot of evidence. I could talk to you about the data for days. And then their opponent says, no, it's not. In fact, you know what? I'm going to punch you in the face if you keep saying that. Now, that's not really making a rational argument that their conclusion is false or that it's not good evidence that they're basing it on. It's just saying, stop believing that, or if you keep it up, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to use force. So scare tactic, appeal to force can kind of be thought of as like, believe what I am saying, or change your opinion, or else, right? Believe me, agree with me, or else what? That's when we get into the topic of whatever the actual threatened force or implied threat is. So sometimes it's like a physical force. Stop saying that or I'll slap you in the face or whatever. In other cases, it could be a little more subtle. So say, for example, someone has control over another person or authority over them, so they have that as leverage to use. Take the case of parents and their children, right? Suppose that the parent and child don't agree on some political issue, and they're having one of those little political disagreements at the dinner table. Suppose then the parent says this to the child. I'm really sick and tired of you criticizing the way we spend on the military. Basically, look, if you keep doing that, just don't forget who pays your tuition. Do you know what I'm saying? Now, what's the threat in that case? Hopefully we can all just point it out. The parent is saying, don't disagree with me about the balance of military spending, because if you do, essentially what would happen, or what would I do? Don't forget who pays your tuition. I mean, it's pretty clear, but just to kind of check in with you and see that you're tracking me, what would be the threat in this case? The scare tactic that's being implied by the remark of the parent. It would be what? Let's see. I know you know it, so I just want to see a little feedback there. Let me get from you what you know. Can you tell me? Let's see. They'll stop paying your tuition, exactly, right? So it's a threatened revocation of tuition payments. Now, is that a way to convince a person rationally that they're holding a false position? No. If you wanted the person to agree with you, then you would make a rational argument as to why they've come to the wrong conclusion or why their evidence is incorrect. But if you just say, look, believe in what I believe, because if you don't, I'm going to make something that is not to your advantage occur, then that would be not making an argument, but rather using a threat to get your way. Don't forget who pays for your tuition is like a threatened revoking of tuition payment. Or don't stay in this house if you believe in Medicare for all. You're not going to sleep under this roof if you believe in Medicare for all. That would be a case of saying, like, look, I don't want you to live here, and I'm not going to let you pay. I'm not going to let you live here rent free or something if you disagree with me on certain social policy issues. So it could be a threatened withdrawal of favors that currently do exist. It could be a threat of actual force. It could be a threat of legal sanctions, like stop disagreeing with me on policy, or I'll find a way to press charges against you for some falsified accusation. So let's see if I have a couple more here in the book I could just go over as well. Don't disagree with me. Remember who pays your tuition. Don't disagree with me or I'll slap your face. Sometimes scare tactic can be used to drive arguments in the political arena. So sometimes someone would say, look, either support the establishment of this policy, or here are some terribly scary things that could occur. In that case, you could say that appealing to fear is the implied threat. But let me make a case or a point to you here, and this is something that you should understand. Not every warning of danger amounts to a scare tactic fallacy or an appeal to force fallacy. So you have to be able to see the difference between an actual case of appeal to force and a legitimate rational warning of some harm that the person may undergo. So like, let me give you this example. What if I tell you, you should not drink and drive? Why? Because if you do, you could easily get into an accident that could cause harm or death or injury to you or to other people. So therefore, you should not drink and drive. Now, is that a scare tactic? No. Because when I'm warning you about the probable consequences that could follow from drinking and driving, it's not that I'm the one that's saying, I'm going to cause that harm. I'm just warning you that out there in general, there is danger associated with that form of behavior. But it's not me that's leveraging that over you as a threat. So in that case, it would not actually be an appeal to force, even though on the surface it might look like it, because I'm warning you about something that don't drink and drive or else. But in this case, the or else doesn't issue from me, the person making the warning. So let's understand that, of course, there can be reasonable basis to tell a person that a course of action is unwise and dangerous, and that would be a different case. And what you have here, what example of a person warning you against speaking out to him, to a government, would not be a form of a scare tactic? Well, let me think about what you're asking. Interesting question. So say that a person has a desire to blow the whistle on a government scandal, and some person that is an associate of them says, I don't know if I would file this whistleblower report, because if you do, there could be retaliation that comes to you. I don't think that that would be a form of the scare tactic if it's the person who makes the warning that is judging that other people may retaliate. If the person who makes the warning is like an officer saying, I will fire you if you file this report, then that would be a scare tactic. So the warning of the negative circumstances, whether that's an appeal to force fallacy or not, depends on from where the harm would issue. If it issues from the one making the warning, then they're the cause of the threat. If the danger arises from circumstances that are unrelated to the person who does make the warning, then it's just something in the nature of events to warn them about it. So that would be my best answer to you there. And it's a good question that gets into the details. Thank you. It does have to do with intention. It has to do with whether you intend to make good on the threat that you are stating to the person as a warning. If you make good on it, then it's not something that just happens. It's something that you cause to happen. And that would be the difference. Okay. So great questions and discussion. We're going to go to the next one. Okay, so keep moving along. Now it's appeal to pity. All right. All right, so definition of appeal to pity, yeah, thank you there, is when pity is invoked in an argument, but it is irrelevant to the conclusion, okay? So when pity is invoked in an argument, but is irrelevant to the argument or to the conclusion. All right, that's the appeal to pity, appeal to emotion, sometimes it's called. So this is easy enough. The idea of this is that someone is trying to get special consideration by invoking the concept of pity, that they want someone to show them pity, to show them some special favor. And the problem is that if it's a fallacy, it's invoked in a scenario where pity is not even relevant to the circumstance. So like here's a case mentioned in the book. Take the issue or scenario of a speeding ticket, a traffic cop. So the cop sees a person going too fast, pulls them over. Now they've got them on the side of the road and they're writing the ticket. Says, "Excuse me, I have to write you this ticket. You were going beyond the speed limit by 20 miles per hour." Now, person in the car says this to the officer. "I am so sorry, officer, but maybe could you please let me off with a warning? Please show me a little pity, because here's the thing. I was watching this documentary last night and it was really very dark and disturbing and depressing, and I'm still shook from that. I'm still going through it in my mind, and so I'm kind of distracted on the road right now. I'm shaken up by this, really sad film that I watched yesterday. So can you just show me a little bit of a break? Give me some pity here." Now, look, in that case, though they're asking for you to feel sorry for them, to grant them pity and a reprieve from the typical punishment, it's problematic because that's not a really justified reason to excuse the traffic ticket. The only real question is, was the person speeding or not? And whether they saw a sad movie or something doesn't really bear on that, so it's not relevant. And we can imagine other substitutes for that example. Cop pulls them over and they say, "I'm sorry, but like my father's sister's best friend, goldfish died, and we've all been struggling with that over the past week. So, I mean, maybe if you give me a ticket, that's just going to throw me over the edge." That's pretty weak and trivial and insignificant. Or my boyfriend or girlfriend, we got into a fight, and I'm just struggling with that, and I really can't. I could use a break. Those are all appeal to pity. Here's another example from the book, just as we're on the book. So I don't have time to type up my assignment for class tomorrow morning. The thing is, I promised my friend that I'd meet them at the movies tonight, and you guys know that it's not okay to break a promise. So that's why I need an extension on this homework. Me as a professor, I guess I'm exposed to cases of this fallacy when a student makes a perhaps insignificant or trivial request for pity in connection with getting an extension or something when a class is being administered. So you'll hear a student say, "I'm sorry, I couldn't complete this on time. I lost my dog, and I've been burdened with that." So the thing is, you shouldn't rely on pity and sympathy to get you out of tricky situations, especially when it's not rising to a level of significance that justifies the special concern or treatment. But here's something that you need to know, okay? Not every single time that a person wants special sympathetic treatment, it's not always a fallacy. It depends on how serious circumstances are. And this is mentioned in the book. So going back to our traffic pullover scenario, suppose cop sees the person driving too fast, pulls them over to give a ticket. And when he comes to the driver's side, the person says, "Officer, yes, I was speeding and I'm very sorry, but the thing is, it's an emergency. Look behind you in my back seat. There's a toddler back there. She's choking on a nickel that she swallowed accidentally. And I don't have time to wait for an emergency, paramedic response. I have to get her to the hospital fast. So that's why I'm breaking the speed limit. And that's why I got to get her there." So look, in this case, it's not just my goldfish died or, I saw a sad movie. It's life and death. And so under those circumstances, perhaps it does rise to a level of seriousness that makes it merited and fair for the request for special concern or consideration to be granted. Andrew, you say, "When my wife is in labor, be an appeal to pity." No, I don't think that would be. No, that would be another case of it being significant. If the student says to the professor, "Look, I have to get an extension because I'm in the intensive care unit on a ventilator," you can't tell him, "Well, come on, don't hit me with your pity party little sob story." I mean, that is obviously very serious. So there are cases to be distinguished from the actual existence of the fallacy, and that's mentioned here. Not all appeals to pity are fallacious. There are times when a person's plight calls for a sympathetic reaction. For example, "Please don't give me a speeding ticket, officer. My toddler swallowed a nickel. She's in the back seat having trouble breathing, and I have to get her to the hospital right now." In this case, we would consider the officer grossly insensitive, maybe even criminally at fault, if she gave the parent a speeding ticket instead of escorting them to the hospital as quickly as possible. Okay? And we're going to talk about this soon, but a lot of times advertising and marketing materials contain fallacious arguments or claims, and sometimes it could be argued that appeal to pity is seen in certain advertisements that want you to spend money on something. So like, I don't know, we've maybe seen advertisements that talk about animals which have been abused or that are in shelters, and they'll show you the saddest, most pitiful images of these animals. Maybe they're using that as a way to mask whether or not the administration of money and dollars that they have is effective at addressing any of the problems the animals face. I'm not saying, Andy, that I do have a problem with PETA per se, but it could be that in some cases the exaggerated appeal to pity is taking us away from a rational consideration of what's the best policy to implement toward addressing issues of animal concern. So anyways, just know that sometimes commercials that you see on TV or that you see in print or on the internet may contain any number of these fallacies, including the one seen here. It's briefly mentioned in the book when it says, many charities appeal to our sense of pity. Once again, there is no fallacy in cases where pity is logically relevant to the appeal for help, but we have to be at least judicious consumers of information and make wise decisions about the legitimacy of claims and whether they're only being propped up on an emotional appeal. Okay, so good. That's appeal to pity. I think we covered that. So I'm going to erase, and then we're going to move to the next. Okay, so yeah, now we are looking at popular appeal. Okay, so popular appeal, this is another one I think that is pretty clear. All right, so popular appeal is seen when somebody appeals to popular opinion to support their conclusion. Okay? When one appeals to popular opinion to support their conclusion. Okay, so that's a fallacy as well. To say that something is true or correct just because it's got more popularity, but that's not always true. And you have to make an independent argument in favor of something in order to claim that it's good or correct. You can't just say it's the popular thing. Like, so for example, take the belief in God, which is the majority standpoint of most. I think that if you look at a statistical breakdown divided between all the different religions, it's up in the high 80s or even 90% in America, with a small minority of people that don't affiliate as a religious believer. But what if someone told you, here's my argument for the existence of God? It's popular. Most people believe in God, so therefore God exists. That's not a good argument for God's existence. There are good arguments for God's existence that have been mentioned throughout history, like some include the cosmological argument, the ontological argument, the argument from design, and others. But just saying it's true because most people think it's true, that's not a good argument. Instead, you'd have to argue why it deserves the popularity that it has achieved on independent grounds. We can go on down the line, take it away from religion, but into the consumer world. There's more iPhones on the market than Androids. More people own an iPhone. So someone could say it's the better phone, it's the better product because it's the more popular product. And look, that's a bad argument too. It might be the better product, but if it is, then you have to make an argument about what it actually does. Like, here's why it's better. Here's why its features are better. Here's why its camera is better. Here's why its user interface is better. And that's why it has earned the popularity that it deserves because of those facts. But just saying that it's good because it's popular doesn't give any reason. And it sort of begs the question, well, why is it popular? You know, take film and music and entertainment. It would be a terrible film critic who just said, what's the best movie? Easy. Just look at the box office receipts. Whatever's #1 is the best film. Obviously, there's more to art criticism than just looking at what most people watch or listen to. And many people with like discerning taste would actually have a different take. You know, a lot of people think that what's the most popular is actually sometimes vapid and, you know, overly commercialized and not substantial enough. So if you just said the best song is whatever's #1 on the radio, you know, a lot of music people would say that's not necessarily correct. You know, and sometimes it has to do with fashion trends too. Like, this is the best shoe, the Air Force One, because it's the most popular current trend. Those could be great shoes, right? But if you thought they were good, you should say something about what's good about the shoe. Its design, its aesthetic. But just saying it's the best because everyone's got a pair isn't really the best argument to make, and it doesn't tell us what basis there is for it being so popular. So yeah, looking here in the textbook, let's see. Sometimes another example of this can be seen when we rely on the popularity of a celebrity or endorsement figure for a product or service that's being advertised or marketed at us. You know, so like say Tom Brady did a commercial for Coca-Cola, and you just say, I think Coca-Cola is a great drink because it's a very popular athlete who has endorsed it, who's a sponsor of it. But the popularity of the person isn't the only thing that you need to consider when you consider the suitability or the desirability of a consumer product. In fact, you know, anybody endorsing these sugary drinks, you'd be better off just drinking water, to be honest. So there's no real link between the popularity of the person and the value of the product or service. But of course, knowing that a lot of people think in these terms, it's an easy way to get a lot of sale. Okay, so popular appeal, a common fallacy, because many times people think whatever's popular must be correct. But of course, sometimes the majority position can be wrong. If you went back in time, right, to let's say 1905, the popular viewpoint in American society would have been that women shouldn't be voting. You know, the Constitution was only amended in 1920, 100 years ago actually, to grant women the right to vote in this country. And I could think that probably most of us would agree that that's the right policy, but it wasn't always the popular policy. And so if we just determined what's good and correct based on what's popular, then there would never be change. What about during the time period of slavery? A majority of citizens in the country at that time might have said that this is a practice that's been with us for so long and it seems to be an economic you know, benefit or something to a society, so it's good. But just saying that a popular viewpoint must be correct eliminates the entire idea that there's merited criticism of any idea, whether it's popular or not. So popular appeal. Okay, so I'm going to move on from that. And we just have a couple more. Okay, guys, so next is appeal to ignorance. All right, what is the appeal to ignorance? So that is when we argue that something is true just because it has not been proven false, okay? Appeal to ignorance. Okay, so this is a fallacy that happens when somebody says, this is true, and the reason is because no one has proven otherwise. That is not a good way to argue. In order to claim that something is true, you need proof or evidence that supports that claim. You cannot merely have the absence of contrary evidence. That is not enough to establish the truth of something. Like, so for example, what if I told you Bigfoot exists, and the reason I'm saying that that is true is because nobody can what? Or nobody has what? You know what I think the response should be. Someone claims, they're making this fallacy, Bigfoot or aliens, whatever, they exist. Because, reason, no, I'm asking you to give me the fallacious reason that one might offer, in case they say, these aliens are definitely real, and the reason I'm telling you they're real is because why? Follow the format of the fallacy. If a person commits the fallacy of appeal to ignorance, claiming that aliens exist, then the reason they would give would be because nobody what? Nobody has proven otherwise. There's no proof that they're not real, so they must be real. That's not proof, though. First of all, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to prove a negative. What if somebody that you were in a relationship with said, you're cheating on me, and I'm telling you I know it because you can't prove that you're not. It would be very difficult to prove that you are not, because it's not possible to prove something that does not exist. So you'd have to canvas the entire physical universe looking for the existence of aliens, see that there are none anywhere, which is physically impossible to do with the limits of space and time that we have. Now, to prove that aliens do exist, you need more than just the lack of disproof. You need proof that is positive, that does indicate they exist. So if we saw, specimens collected from the Mars rover that showed little microbial life, then that would be the kind of evidence that gives the reason to believe in their existence. But it's not good enough to just say, you can't prove otherwise, so it must be true. What if, take for example, when we went to war in Iraq, okay, and that was back in 2003. And when we did that, one reason that was mentioned by the policymakers in power was that they thought that they were developing these weapons of mass destruction. Now, there were weapons inspectors out there that were actually trying to determine whether that was correct or not. But since we started launching weapons over there, they had to withdraw. Nonetheless, a lot of people argued, they must be making these weapons because nobody's proven that they aren't. But that wasn't good reasons. In fact, we discovered later that they were never developing weapons of mass destruction. So in order to justify the claim that they were, you would need proof that they were, not just nobody can prove the contrary. Okay, so let's see if I've got a few more things from the book on this. Someone says UFOs don't exist. No one's been able to prove that they do. So the absence of contrary evidence is not proof of something. You cannot say to me right now, there's got to be leprechauns somewhere because no one's shown me that they don't exist. That's not proof. Proof would be something that establishes their actual existence, not just something that fails to prove their non-existence. Now, here's one important exception to this concept. I want to mention this briefly. You might look at that and you might think, well, isn't that a little bit contradictory to the principle in law that you're innocent until proven guilty? Wouldn't that be one of these fallacies then? Somebody says, I'm innocent and I'm telling you that that's the case because you cannot prove that I'm not. Well, on the surface of it, it does kind of look like an appeal to ignorance fallacy, but it's an exception to the rule. In general, in everyday life, we should not think that we should not think that we've proven something just because it has not been disproven. If you lost your watch, you can't just say, I know it was stolen, because nobody can prove that it wasn't stolen. But in a court of law, we have to give people the presumption of innocence because the state has so much power that if we did not do that, it would be too easy for people's liberty to be removed and to have them imprisoned without substantial evidence of their guilt. So the legal system kind of bends over backwards to grant a presumption of innocence, and that holds unless sufficient proof exists to make the case of guilt. But in everyday life, we don't say aliens are assumed to exist until proven otherwise. The burden of proof is on a person who brings a claim. In the court of law, though, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. You don't have to prove your innocence. They have to prove your guilt. So it might look as though it is a kind of deviation from the general rule not to commit this fallacy. But if we said of people that go to court and are put on trial, you're not innocent unless you can prove your innocence, then that would give the state too much power over us to imprison us and deprive us of our liberty. So we have an exception to this general principle when it comes to the context of law. You are innocent until proven guilty. But in the general case of everyday life, claims are not assumed to be true until they are disproven, okay? So here, I'll read to you, that's mentioned in the book. It says here, people may try to get out of a tight spot. Sorry, next paragraph. There is an important exception to the fallacy of appeal to ignorance. In a court of law, a defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and the burden of proof is on the prosecution, not on the defendant. The legal principle was designed to prevent punishment of the innocent, which is considered a much greater injustice than letting a guilty person go free. In addition, because the government is much more powerful than the individual, this principle helps level the playing field. It's important to note that a not guilty verdict is just that. It's not necessarily proof of the person's innocence. It's showing that guilt was not established by evidence. Okay, so there we go, appeal to ignorance and some little discussion on that point. So we're still finishing up. We just have three more quick definitions. So moving on to the next, and it's called hasty generalization. Okay, hasty generalization. This fallacy is when we make a universal claim based on a sample that is either too small or biased. Okay. When we make a universal claim, that's what a generalization is, based on a sample that is either too small or biased. And that's hasty generalization. Okay, so a couple points. What does the word generalization mean? A generalization is a universal claim. It has the form, all of these things are such and such. So if I say to you, all dogs go to heaven, that would be a generalization. It's a generalization about all the dogs. It says each and every one of them goes to heaven, not just most, not just some, all of them. So a generalization is a general claim about a whole category of things. You know, I forget the business about the chromosomes. All women have an XY chromosome or something like that. That could be a generalization. If I'm getting my science wrong, you can check me later. But do we understand that's what a generalization is? Now, the fallacy we're talking about here is when you jump to a general claim too quickly. Hasty means too fast or too quickly. So a hasty generalization is when you jump to the conclusion of a general claim, but based on limited evidence, only a couple cases, so a sample of evidence that's too small or is unrepresentative of the case. So here's an example from the book. I'm sure you can follow me here. Say that the person is reasoning like this. So growing up in my house, my father was abusive. Then later on in high school, I had a boyfriend that was abusive. Okay, so her conclusion is what? My father was abusive growing up. Then I had a boyfriend in high school, was abusive to me. So basically, therefore what? Hasty generalization. What do you say? Let's see someone put it out there. In this case, mentioned in the book, all men are abusive. All men are abusers, right? Now, is that a fair conclusion to draw based on the two significant examples? Not really. It's two people, and we're using that as a basis of evidence to generalize over the whole category of men. So the thing about generalizations is they're very strong statements. They're bold statements. It's not like saying some men are abusive, most are. It's making the universal claim that all are. For any generalization to be true, there would have to be extraordinary support. There would have to be very widespread and uncontroverted evidence for that. But just two examples is certainly not enough to draw this big general claim from. Okay, and it could be the same with women. You know, I had my mom, divorced my dad, and then my girlfriend dumped me. So women are just unfaithful or something. You know, like for example, someone could say something like that, and that might not be fair, of course, based on a few cases in their own life. Let's see. Sometimes stereotypes are based on hasty generalization when a person has had a couple of experiences with people of a certain category and then generalizes from those to the entire group, which is of course not fair. You got to judge people as individuals instead of looking at them as just members of a group with whom you've only had other experiences with previous cases. Let's see. Here's one example mentioned in the book, or I don't know, like religious stereotypes. Suppose that there was a member of a certain religious affiliation that was extreme and that committed acts of terrorism, and then someone says, okay, so all members of that religion are terrorists. Of course, that would generalize very quickly from a conspicuous handful of cases. And if you know anything about the way religions are practiced in the world, that's not a fair assessment. How about this one from the book? College education is the great equalizer when it comes to class in the United States. I can name several people, including Oprah Winfrey, Starbucks founder Howard Schultz, and the founder of Excel, Kenny Trout. They came from poor families and put themselves through college and went on to become billionaires. So the generalization here is that anybody can make it from rags to riches in the United States because here's 3 people that have done it. But that's a real hasty generalization based on just 3 cases, and it mentions that here. It says, this statement is a hasty generalization based on only a handful of cases. In fact, while 77% of young people from rich families graduate from college, only 9% from poor families earn a college degree, which intensifies the currently 30-year high gap between the rich and poor. So it's not necessarily true that anybody with the right motivation and so on can achieve anything in America, although it's logically possible. It's not the case with all. At least that's the example used here. So to avoid committing hasty generalization, don't jump to conclusions off of just a couple of cases. Another example could be if the sample is misrepresentative. Okay, so suppose that somebody says, I believe, young people are college students are basically conservative, because me and my friends, when we were in college, we were conservative. Now, a person self-selects their friends, and usually that will reflect somewhat their own priorities, beliefs, and ideas. So maybe someone has got a close circle of friends that all have a similar political ideology, but that cannot really be used to generalize to the case of all college students because it's a biased sample. So look, in general, let us not rush to conclusions too quickly based on limited, scanty, or unrepresentative basis of evidence. Okay, so that's hasty generalization for you guys. So any generalization requires a large enough, unbiased, and up-to-date sample. That's how you avoid this. Okay, so we just got 2 more now. Getting close to the end. The 2 last ones are these, straw man and red herring. Okay, so first off, straw man. Straw man is the fallacy that happens when you distort or misrepresent your opponent's argument to make it seem easier to refute. Strawman. Yeah, so when you do this fallacy, that is when you are distorting or misrepresenting your opponent's argument. And why would one do that? In order to make it sound ridiculous, extreme, or oversimplified, and then they try to criticize that misrepresented version of the argument, okay? So like imagine this, 2 people having a discussion or debate. One person says, we probably should try and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, maybe apply a carbon tax or something, because if we can reduce those things, then we can have a more stable planet, but if we don't, then greenhouse gases will get out of control and we'll have a big problem with heating up of the planet over the next century, right? So they just make the case on reducing emissions, maybe by imposing a carbon tax. Now here's person B, their opponent. They say, okay, but hold on, what are you saying? You're saying like we should just completely shut down all energy production. That's insane. If we do that, our economy is going to collapse and we won't be able to transport ourselves around. Now, what's wrong with person B's response? Person A said, let's have a carbon tax to reduce greenhouse gas. That's the way we can solve this global warming problem. Person B says, it's insane, though, to stop all energy production. So you're wrong. What's wrong with B's response? B says that you want to do what? Curtail and completely cancel all forms of energy production. Is that what person A said, though? Did they claim that? Did they say, this is what I want us to do? Yeah, it's not all energy. They're just saying, like, let's reduce a little bit. Like, let's make it a little harder for carbon producers to do it without any kind of restriction. So there's a moderate position that person A stated, but person B characterized it as an extreme point of view. So like here, another case. Person A says, our drug laws, we should maybe reconsider some of them. Some of the drugs are very dangerous, but but at least let's look at like, marijuana, cannabis, whatever you want to call it. That's classified along with some of those same other drugs, but I don't think it's as addictive, and it might even have some therapeutic benefits or whatever. So I would say we should reconsider the classification of that as a criminal, as a controlled substance. Now, person A said, let's reconsider the rules and regulations on marijuana in this country, because there's maybe too many people in prison and we spend a lot of money to incarcerate them. Person B, if they're going to make a straw man reply, what do you think would be the straw man reply to person A there? A says, overpopulated prison, too many costs to the taxpayer. Maybe we should legalize marijuana because of that. Person B comes back and says, what do you think? Now, the format is going to be person B says, here's what you're saying, and then they completely overhype, exaggerate, mischaracterize their view. So what would be the response of the straw man here? The straw man fallacy response to the person in favor of legalizing cannabis. They say, let me understand your view. You're saying what? Just go ahead and let me see what you think. Go ahead. You can say. It's not that hard. I mean, A says legalize marijuana. B says, well, what you want to do then, if I understand you, is, and then they exaggerate. So like, what would they say? So what, we should legalize all drugs? We should allow kids to do them while they're at school? I mean, if that's the case, people are going to be smoking crack while they're, doing their jobs. People won't even be able to keep a job, finish school, maintain a household, raise family, raise kids. It's going to be chaos, So if you want to legalize all the drugs, I'm sorry, you're totally wrong. But again, that's a straw man reply. The first person didn't say all that. The first person said something much more restricted. And whether it's true or false, you got to reply to their argument, not this distorted, overhyped version of it. Maybe somebody says, I think women should have safe and legal access to abortion. That's important to have a woman's freedom to choose. Person B says what? So we could just kill children that are walking around on the street because we don't want to have responsibility for them? That's totally hard. That's crazy. So you're definitely wrong. But person A is making a different case. They're not talking about the killing of children that have been born. They're talking about killing of the fetus in the womb, and this is a different case. If you don't agree with that, then you should make a response that's based on what they actually said. So there's a lot of examples in life where we do see the straw man happening. If I could find another example here from the book, someone says, I think we should restrict genetically modified crops. We don't know if those are healthy for people. Maybe that's some form of agricultural production that we should limit. And somebody says back to them, but hold on, if we don't allow ourselves to grow crops, we're all going to starve to death. I mean, we've got to have produce. Person A didn't say let's cancel all forms of agriculture, just one particular type, the genetically modified. Somebody says, I don't like the idea of legalizing same-sex marriage because what those people want is to criminalize heterosexual marriage, and that would be totally destructive to traditional marriage. But that, again, is a straw man that misrepresents the advocate for marriage equality as being a person who has an agenda to eliminate existing conventions when it comes to opposite-sex marriage. So yeah, those would all be straw man. Let me say this about straw man really quick. The name. The name is supposed to call to mind a certain visual metaphor, okay? So what a straw man is literally is like a scarecrow. And what is a scarecrow? It's a thing that is used by farmers to protect their crops against crows and other birds that would peck away and prey on the fields that they're growing for agricultural production. So you put the scarecrow out there, and it's supposed to be a decoy that throws off these crows, right? Now, it's kind of a metaphor because with the straw man fallacy, someone gave you an argument, but you're not replying to their real argument. You're replying to this made up, exaggerated version of it that you reply with. And so what you're attacking is not their argument, but the straw man version of it, which they didn't really say. So the straw man is supposed to be, you're thinking of like this made up zombie version of what they actually said, and it sounds way worse than their original position. So they say when this fallacy is committed, you're attacking a straw man. I didn't say it that way, and that's not my view, and you're misrepresenting my argument. So basically, don't do that. Don't misrepresent what other people say to make their arguments seem completely out of bounds and irrational. If you don't like a person's position, it's easy enough to think of reasons why that position is false or incorrect. You don't have to, exaggerate or whatever, or oversimplify the nature of their claims. Okay, so that's straw man. And the last one is red herring. So we're finishing with red herring. Red herring is when you try to distract an argument by bringing up a different, unrelated topic. Bringing up a different, unrelated topic. Okay, it says, when you try to distract an argument by bringing up a different, unrelated topic. So, okay, red herring. This happens also quite often in everyday life and speech and conversation. So suppose like one person says, hey, global warming's out of control, we got to get those emissions down. Person B says, no way, man, that's false. Because look, have you looked at terrorism? I mean, that's the real problem we got to look at. What's wrong here? They're unrelated issues. They're both problematic. You're not making the case that there's no problem with global warming by saying here's another problem that could also be focused on. It's just basically changing the topic. It's trying to create a tangent away from the original topic. Like if somebody, like say someone, we'll go back to the case of cheating in a relationship. Someone cheated on you and you're like, what are you doing? I thought you said we were going to be faithful. You betrayed me. And they say, look, I know, but I mean, come on, some people kill their partner, you know? I mean, I didn't do that. So is this really wrong? That's a red herring. We're not talking about homicide. We're talking about an extramarital affair. They're different cases. They're both bad things to do. You're not invalidating the original viewpoint or claim by bringing up something else. How about another case? Someone might say, in America, we have a problem with mass incarceration. We're paying so much money to put so many people in jail, sometimes for frivolous reasons. Maybe there's racial disparities there. We got to reform our criminal justice system. Somebody else says back, no, I don't think that's true, man, because look at what they do in third world countries in certain parts of the planet. They just throw people in jail for nothing. They'll execute people for just, disagreeing with the government. So don't tell me we have a problem. But that is, again, a red herring. To point out that there are even bigger problems and more institutional inadequacies in other parts of the world does not at all rebut the claim that, we have some issues in our own system as well. So in all those cases, it's a red herring. Maybe some more from the book to close. And we'll finish right to this. Why are you so upset about me drinking and driving? I mean, have you looked at how many people text and drive? I mean, that's just as bad, so what's wrong with me? Look, they're different problems. It's bad to drink and drive, of course, and it's also bad to text and drive. But you're not going to get off the hook or win the argument against the person that says you shouldn't drink and drive by just pointing out that there's other things people do while driving that are just as or somewhat dangerous also. Now, about red herring, okay, and I'm going to leave this with this. There's a visual metaphor I want you to understand about that as well, and that's where it gets its name from. So if you're a hunter and you go out there with like hunting dogs, like a foxhound or a bloodhound, there's a certain tactic that can be used to train them up so that they're really good at retrieving prey that you have like shot at from a distance. So say you shot a pheasant and it's 100 yards away or 400 yards away, and you need this dog to go retrieve it and fetch it and bring it back to you. To get these dogs really good at that, what they would sometimes do is get these, now a red herring. A herring is actually a very small, very smelly fish. And so in the literal case of red herring, they would use them to train these dogs. And so they would place the red herrings at tangent lines, diagonal to the dog and its intended prey. And what they're trying to do is see, will the dog be distracted by these very smelly herrings and get thrown off the scent or the track of its main prey and get diverted into one of these tangents going over for the herring. When the dog was very well trained in this method, then it would learn to ignore the smelly herrings, not to be diverted, and to stay on course and to focus on the prey ahead. Now, it's all a metaphor kind of, right? In the course of an argument, there's one topic that's being discussed, and someone might try to throw out red herrings to distract or to change the subject or to switch topics. But you're supposed to not take the bait and direct the person back to the actual conversation. If a person does a red herring, say, I'm sorry, that's a red herring. We have to return to the original topic because this is unrelated and it's irrelevant. You're bringing up a separate issue. We could talk about that at another time. But I thought we were having a conversation about the merits of this policy or this particular concept or idea. So whether it was a dog getting distracted by an actual red herring or maybe me and you getting distracted by a separate, unrelated issue in the context of an exchange of ideas, we're supposed to keep ourselves focused on the actual topic and the actual idea, just like this dog. So with that, everybody, I think I've covered all the material I wanted to show you guys today. So don't forget, these 8 fallacies are the ones that are used on the homework, which is going to be due on Thursday before class time. Just email me that. You don't have to write out each example with the full argument. You just have to give me the name of the fallacy that occurs in that example. And overall, there are 8 fallacies of relevance that we've learned. So your optional answers for A through Z are the name of one of these 8 or the words no fallacy, in case there's no fallacy committed in the example. Like I also said, I'm finishing your midterm grading today, and I'll let you know tomorrow by Canvas that you can inquire by email for your grade and for the written comments. No, good question, Andy. The fallacies on the homework are exclusively these ones from today's lesson. So don't use the fallacies of ambiguity or unwarranted assumption on that homework. Those will be quizzed next Tuesday when we do take the quiz on this stuff. So anyways, other questions anybody has, feel free to let me know by email. If anybody ever wanted to have a Skype chat meeting, I'm also happy to do that. So I'm just going to try and be as helpful to you guys as I can, but that's what I would tell you for today, okay? So hopefully you guys have a great day then, and you're all doing well, staying healthy. I can report that I'm doing fine here, so let's try and keep it that way. Take care, everybody. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys back on Thursday, and we'll talk about unwarranted assumption fallacies then, okay? Thank you, guys.